All right, strap in, everybody. Today, we're diving into a story that almost sounds too crazy to be true.
I know, right?
It's the attempted theft of Abraham Lincoln's body.
Seriously, it's like something out of a movie.
We're taking a look at this wild tale through an episode of the American History Tellers podcast called The Manhunt.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And, I mean, how is stealing a president's body even possible?
Well, it's important to remember, this wasn't some spur-of-the-moment grave robbery.
Okay, so it was planned.
Yeah, it was meticulously planned. And the year it all went down, 1876, it really gives you a sense of the motivations behind it all.
1876, right. The country was still reeling from the Civil War.
Exactly.
There was all this political tension, and Chicago, well, it was kind of a wild place back then.
A hotbed for all sorts of activity.
Like counterfeiting, right.
Oh, absolutely. Chicago was a hub for counterfeiters, including this gang led by Big Jim Keneally.
And counterfeiting then was a serious business, wasn't it?
Oh, yeah, definitely. We're not talking about some guy in his basement with a photocopier. These guys were pros.
Like, they were really skilled?
They were engraving plates and everything,
Yeah.
mimicking all the little details and security features of real money.
Huh, guess that takes some real talent. So these weren't your average crooks.
Not at all.
I mean, what made them think they could even get away with something as crazy as stealing Lincoln's body?
Well, the plan was to hold the body for ransom.
Ransom. Like kidnapping.
Exactly. They wanted a whopping $200,000, which back then was an insane amount of money.
Wow. That's a king's ransom.
Plus, they also demanded the release of one of their own, Ben Boyd, who was a master counterfeiter.
So they were willing to risk it all for their buddy, huh? But why Lincoln, though?
That's the interesting part, right?
I mean, was there some kind of grudge against him?
Well, they hatched this whole plot on Election Day, 1876.
Election day. What were they hoping to blend in with the crowds?
It was a pretty chaotic scene back then.
Yeah, I bet. Elections in the 1870s were practically street brawls compared to today.
You got it. So maybe they figured they'd just slip in unnoticed amidst all the commotion.
Smart, I guess.
But yeah, the choice of Lincoln is interesting.
It makes you wonder if there was something deeper going on.
Right.
I mean, even in death, Lincoln was a powerful symbol.
Absolutely.
And for those who opposed what he stood for, well, his tomb might have seemed like, I don't know, a target.
Right, a way to strike back at what he represented. It's a possibility.
Okay, so we've got political unrest, a gang of skilled criminals, and a target that seems almost unthinkable.
It's a recipe for a wild story.
But they needed someone on the inside, right?
You're talking about Louis Swiggles.
Swiggles, who was he?
He was the roper, the informant.
An informant, so like a double agent kind of thing.
Exactly. He was working with Secret Service agent Patrick Tier, who had gotten wind of the plot.
Oh, so the Secret Service was onto them?
Well, Tier was. His superiors didn't really believe him at first.
Really? They brushed him off?
Yeah, they thought it was too outlandish.
Wow, that's got to be frustrating. So what did Tyr do?
He went rogue.
He did.
He was determined to stop this from happening, even hired 2 Pinkerton detectives to help him.
Pinkerton detectives. Wow, that's serious. Those guys were like the FBI of their time.
Exactly. Known for their investigative skills and sometimes for their, let's say, rough tactics.
Yeah, I've heard some stories. So we've got this crazy mix of players,
Right.
criminals, a rogue Secret Service agent, private detectives, and an informant playing both sides. Talk about high stakes.
And all this is happening without any of the technology we take for granted today.
Yeah, no cell phones, no GPS, no fancy surveillance equipment.
They were relying on telegrams, handwritten notes, face-to-face meetings.
I can't even imagine. The margin for error must have been razor thin.
You said it. One slip up, and the whole thing could have fallen apart.
So Election Day arrives, November 6, 1876.
The day of the heist.
The gang, which includes 2 guys named Jack Hughes and Terrence Mullen, they're the muscle, head to Chicago's Central Station.
And right behind them, trying to stay out of sight, is Tier and his Pinkerton backup.
Wow, talk about a tense situation.
Oh, and they got to keep an eye on Swiggles, too.
Right, because he's pretending to be part of the game.
It's a classic cat and mouse chase, but on a train with a bunch of unsuspecting passengers.
I bet that train ride was nerve-wracking, especially for Swiggles.
He had to gain the gang's trust while also feeding info back to Tier.
Yeah, talk about walking a tightrope.
That kind of double life takes nerves of steel.
Seriously, this isn't like some TV show. This is real life in 1876.
The stakes were incredibly high.
So after this long, tense journey, they finally arrive in Springfield, right?
Yep, at the crack of dawn.
And I bet Springfield on Election Day was a sight to behold.
Oh, it was buzzing. Rallies, arguments, celebrations. It was the perfect cover.
Yeah, I bet a group of guys trying to steal a president's body wouldn't stand out too much that day.
You were telling me.
But there's almost a hiccup right away, isn't there?
Yeah, Swiggles has a close call.
What happens?
He has to explain why one of the Pinkertons, his supposed backup, disappeared from the train.
Oh.
But he thinks on his feet, comes up with a convincing story,
Cute.
which honestly says a lot about the gang's trust in him. Or maybe their naivete.
Yeah, either way, he managed to keep the plan on track.
He did.
So that afternoon, Tyr puts together his team.
Right, the remaining Pinkerton and a couple of Secret Service agents he managed to wrangle as backup.
Okay, so they're ready to take down these grave robbers.
But there's a twist. One of the agents brought a reporter along.
He did what?
Yeah, a civilian in the middle of a covert operation.
Tyr must have been furious.
I can only imagine. And worried too. This reporter could blow the whole thing wide open.
Right, talk about an unexpected wrench in the plans.
But there's no time to argue. They have to move forward.
What's the plan?
They decide to hide out in the Lincoln Museum. It's this small building attached to the tomb. And they wait for Swiggles to signal that the thieves are inside.
So it all comes down to timing.
Absolutely. Tyr wants to catch them in the act, but not let them actually get away with the coffin.
Right, and damaging the coffin itself is out of the question.
Absolutely.
So, night falls, the stage is set, the thieves arrive at the cemetery, tools in hand.
It's go time.
And here's where things get really wild. They break into the tomb with almost no resistance.
Yeah, the security back then was, well, let's just say it wasn't Fort Knox.
You'd think they'd have more than a flimsy door protecting the remains of a president.
Right. It seems almost naive looking back, but maybe it was a different time.
Maybe they just thought desecrating Lincoln's tomb was so unthinkable it wouldn't even cross anyone's mind.
Or maybe they just completely underestimated these criminals.
Well, underestimate them they did. Because as the thieves get to work inside the tomb, Swiggles tries to sneak away to update Tyr.
But things are about to go from bad to worse. That's where we'll pick things up in part 2. Welcome back, folks. When we left off, our grave-robbing crew was inside Lincoln's tomb, about to make contact with the president's coffin.
Oh, yeah. They'd made it past that outer door. And I mean, it can't be that easy, can it? Like, the coffin's just right there.
Well, no. Not exactly. It seems they ran into a bit of a snag.
Ooh.
Yeah. So, turns out Lincoln's coffin wasn't actually directly inside that sarcophagus.
What? So like a secret compartment or something?
Kinda. It was more like a vault within a vault. This extra layer of marble and concrete.
Wow. So even back then, they were thinking ahead?
It seems so.
I guess they figured Lincoln's final resting place might attract some unwanted attention.
Smart thinking on their part. Maybe they skimped a little on the outer security.
Right, that flimsy door.
But hey, at least they took protecting the actual remains seriously.
I bet those thieves were pretty ticked off when they hit that second layer of stone.
You think. Step them back a bit.
Speaking of setbacks, what about Swiggles? Wasn't he supposed to signal Tyr?
Oh, he was. But he's in a tight spot. Hughes and Mullen were getting suspicious, keeping him close, watching his every move. And remember, he's walking a tightrope here.
Yeah, one wrong step and it's all over for him.
No kidding.
So what's Tyr doing while all this is going on?
Him and his team, they're stuck in the museum, just listening to the sounds of the thieves working in the tomb.
I bet every clang of a hammer, every scrape of a chisel must felt like an hour.
It was a waiting game.
With a reporter in tow?
Ooh.
I bet Tyr was ready to jump out of his skin.
Oh, I'm sure. So picture this.
Yeah.
Tyr, anxious, impatient, and ultimately, he makes a mistake.
What'd he do?
In his rush to catch those guys red-handed, he forgets to put his boots back on.
He forgot his boots. Seriously.
Yeah, he's tiptoeing through the cemetery in his socks. Trying to stay quiet, I guess.
That's some serious dedication, but also kind of hilarious.
It is, looking back. So they're approaching the tomb, boots or no boots, and then boom, disaster strikes.
What?
One of Tyr's men accidentally fires his gun.
Oh no. I bet that sent those grave robbers scrambling.
Chaos. Absolute chaos. Tyr, thinking the shot came from the thieves, orders his men to storm the tomb.
So they burst in, guns blazing.
You got it.
Yeah.
But guess what?
What?
The tomb is empty. The thieves are gone. Vanished.
Wait, how'd they pull that off?
It seems in all the confusion, the gunshot, Tyr's team rushing in, the thieves slipped out a back exit.
So they just disappear into the night.
Just like that. Poof. Gone. Leaving Tyr and his crew with nothing.
Wow. All that work, all that planning, all for nothing.
Not quite nothing. Remember, they didn't get away with Lincoln's body.
That's true. But still, talk about a letdown.
Oh, it gets worse. In the dark, all that commotion, you know what happens.
What?
Tier's men end up in a brief shootout with each other.
Wait, seriously?
Yeah.
That's like something out of a slapstick comedy.
You can't make this stuff up. It went from high-stakes operation to, well, a bit of a mess.
So the takeaway here is communication is key.
Always.
Yeah.
Especially under pressure.
Well, at least Lincoln's body is safe. But the thieves are gone.
For now.
Tier's plan totally backfired. I bet his superiors were thrilled.
Not to mention that reporter he accidentally brought along.
Oh, yeah, I'd forgotten about him. Talk about a public relations nightmare.
You said it. But luckily for Tier, he's got an ace up his sleeve. Or rather, one very valuable ace.
You mean?
Swiggles. He's still undercover, remember?
Oh, yeah, right. I'd almost forgotten about him with all the craziness.
Well, he uses his connections to track down Mullen and Hughes.
Swiggles, the hero of the hour. It seems like every time things go wrong, he's there to save the day.
He definitely proves his worth in this whole saga.
So what's Tier doing during all this?
Well, he actually falls ill. So he's laid up while Swiggles is feeding him info.
Even when he's down and out, Tier's still working the case.
That's dedication.
But how do they actually catch these guys?
Okay, so a few weeks pass.
Mm.
Hughes and Mullen are back in Chicago feeling pretty smug.
But like they got away with it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
They're hanging out at their usual spot, this saloon called the Hub.
Not the smartest move, going back to their old haunts.
Arrogance, maybe? They probably figured no one was looking for them anymore.
Big mistake.
Huge mistake. Because guess what? Swiggles tipped off Tier and the police.
They walked right into a trap.
It was beautiful. Picture this.
Yeah.
2 undercover detectives, one to Pinkerton, one from Chicago PD, stroll into the saloon. They confront Hughes and Mullen.
Guns blazing.
Oh, yeah. It was a classic Wild West showdown.
Yeah.
Right there in a crowded saloon.
I bet those patrons scattered like flies.
I wouldn't want to be caught in the crossfire.
So, was he there?
Oh, he wouldn't miss this for the world. Even though he's still weak from his illness, he arrives just in time to personally slap the cuffs on those 2 would-be body snatchers.
That's gotta feel good.
A moment of sweet, sweet revenge.
So, Mullen and Hughes are finally behind bars. Case closed, right? All right, so Hughes and Mullen, they're finally behind bars. Tier's gotten his guys, well, most of them anyway. You'd think that'd be the end of the story, but it's not quite over yet, is it?
Not exactly. There's still one pretty big loose end.
Big Jim.
Big Jim. The mastermind behind the whole thing.
And he's just out there walking around free.
Well, for now, at least.
It'd be pretty frustrating if he got away with it after all that.
Oh, but, you know, karma has a way of working things out.
Yeah, it usually does. So, what happens? Does Tier finally get the evidence he needs to take Big Jim down?
Well, actually, it's not Kier who delivers the final blow.
It's not.
It's Terrence Mullen. Remember, he's in prison now.
Oh, yeah, right. Serving time for that whole grave robbing fiasco.
Well, it turns out Big Jim decided to sell their stake in the saloon while Mullen was locked up.
Oh, wow. That's cold.
You can say that again.
Talk about adding insult to injury.
Yeah, betrayal can really sting. Especially in the criminal world.
I bet Mullen was fuming.
Oh, he was. So he cuts a deal with Tier.
He does.
Spills the beans. Gives Tier everything he needs to bring Big Jim down.
So the guy he was trying to break out of prison ends up being his downfall.
It's funny how things work out, isn't it?
So what happens to Big Jim? Does he get what's coming to him?
He does. Eventually.
How so?
He gets caught with a bunch of counterfeit bills, the very thing that started this whole crazy chain of events.
Talk about poetic justice.
And he gets sentenced to 2 years in prison.
2 years? That doesn't seem like much for a criminal mastermind.
Well, it's not exactly a life sentence. But I guess it's fitting that he got brought down by his own craftiness.
Okay, what about our hero, Louis Swiggles? He gets a parade, right? Hails as a national hero.
Well, he does get his 15 minutes of fame.
He does.
Newspapers called him the Prince of the Ropers, praising his undercover work.
I bet that felt good after all he went through.
Sadly, though, his story doesn't have a fairy tale ending.
Oh no, don't tell me he went back to a life of crime.
A few years later, he ends up back in prison for burglary.
Man, that's tough.
It really makes you think, doesn't it?
Yeah, like maybe for some people, that life's just too hard to escape.
Even after proving he could be something more.
And what about Ben Boyd, the counterfeiter the gang wanted to break out?
His story actually has a pretty good ending. He served his time, got out, and, well, he went straight.
Wow, really?
Yeah, the podcast said he became a, quote, productive member of society.
So there's hope for everyone, huh?
Maybe so. even for criminals.
Okay, last but not least, what happens to Tyr, our rogue Secret Service agent?
Well, this case, it made him famous.
I bet.
He stayed with the Secret Service for another 23 years, retired in 1899.
I bet he had some stories to tell.
Yeah. Can you imagine those retirement parties?
But in the end, the most important thing is Lincoln's body was safe.
Exactly. And after all that, let me tell you, they weren't taking any chances.
What do you mean?
They reburied Lincoln's coffin under 10 feet of concrete.
10 feet. I guess that'll keep the grave robbers out.
Yeah, no kidding.
It's crazy how one event can change the way we protect things.
It shows you the power of symbols. Lincoln's tomb, it represents more than just a grave.
Yeah, it's a symbol of unity,
Yeah.
a reminder of what the country went through.
And the fact that someone wanted to desecrate that, it really shook people up.
Makes you realize that even in death, these figures, these symbols, they're vulnerable.
Yeah. It makes you think, what are we willing to do to protect what we hold dear? How do we safeguard our history?
That's a big question.
It is, and it's something we're still dealing with today.
Well, this has been quite a deep dive.
It has.
A story of audacity and, honestly, some pretty big blunders.
Oh, yeah.
But in the end, it's a reminder that some things are worth protecting no matter what.
And sometimes it takes a wild story like this to make us realize just how much those things matter.
I think that's a good place to leave it. Thanks for joining me on this deep dive into the attempted theft of Abraham Lincoln's body.
It's been a pleasure.